The alarm blared, a raw, piercing shriek that clawed at the quiet pre-dawn hours of the city. Not a fire alarm, but a security breach. My radio crackling with urgency confirmed it. Unit 703, confirmed breach at the Sterling Museum of Art downtown. Motion sensors tripped in the European Antiquities Wing. All available units respond. My heart, already thrumming with the caffeine from my third cup of coffee, kicked into overdrive. The Sterling was no ordinary target. It was a fortress, an architectural behemoth housing priceless artifacts, protected by layers of state-of-the-art security. The kind of place that made you wonder if anyone could ever truly get in, let alone out. I slammed the patrol car into gear, sirens wailing, cutting through the deserted streets. The thought of a break-in at the Sterling Museum was almost laughable. It was the kind of place that had more cameras than a Hollywood studio, more pressure sensors than a nuclear launch facility. You didn't just break into the Sterling, you got caught trying. But the alarm was real. And as I pulled up to the grand, imposing structure, bathed in the flashing red and blue of arriving units, the impossible seemed to have happened. The main entrance, a colossal set of bronze doors usually sealed tighter than a vault, stood slightly ajar, not forced open, not blown off their hinges, just open, like someone had politely let themselves in, then left in a hurry. Sergeant Miller was already there, his face grim, directing officers with rapid, clipped commands. He caught my eye. "Carter, you're with me, front entry team." He didn't need to say more. The tension in the air was palpable, thicker than the morning fog still clinging to the streetlights. This wasn't just a simple smash and grab. This felt surgical. We entered, weapons raised, flashlights cutting through the museum's cavernous lobby. The usual hushed reverence of the space was replaced by an eerie, hollow silence. Marble floors gleamed under our tactical lights, reflecting the muted chaos of flashing emergency lights from outside. The air was cool, stale, carrying the faint metallic scent of ozone from the activated alarm system. Every shadow seemed to shift, every statue a potential hiding spot. My senses were on high alert, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The alarm was still wailing, a persistent high-pitched shriek that grated on the nerves. It meant the perpetrators were either still, inside, or they didn't care about noise. As we moved deeper into the European Antiquities Wing, the silence grew heavier. No shattered display cases, no scattered glass, no sign of forced entry on any of the inner exhibit doors. The priceless artifacts, ancient coins, intricate jewelry, small gleaming sculptures, sat undisturbed in their illuminated cases. It was baffling. Every alarm had been triggered, yet nothing appeared to be missing. It defied logic. "Hold!" Miller's voice cut through the alarm's shriek. He pointed. On the polished marble floor, directly beneath a priceless, untouched Byzantine, lay a single neatly folded note. My stomach clenched. This wasn't a robbery. This was a message. I approached cautiously, Miller covering me. The note was simple, typed, and clipped to the floor with a single antique golden safety pin. I picked it up, my gloved fingers carefully, unfolding the crisp paper. The words stared back at me, stark and unsettling. "The jewels are meaningless. We took the true treasure, and you'll never find him." My blood ran cold. "Miller," I breathed, handing him the note. He read it, his brow furrowing deeper. "Find him. Who are they talking about?" The alarm was still screaming, mocking us. The museum, filled with ancient relics, was silent, untouched, except for this note, and the chilling implication. We began a frantic, systematic sweep of the entire museum. Every wing, every gallery, every storage room. We checked security camera feeds, impossible. The entire system, despite the active alarm, showed only static, a complete blackout. This wasn't just a thief. This was a ghost, a professional capable of bypassing state-of-the-art systems without leaving a digital trace. Then we found it. Not something missing, but someone. A guard. Old man Henderson. Elias Henderson. He was supposed to be stationed in the European Antiquities Wing. His empty, chair sat perfectly upright beside his console. His coffee cup was still warm. But Henderson was gone, vanished without a struggle, without a sound. Elias Henderson, the kindest, most meticulous, and utterly harmless security guard who had worked at the Sterling for 40 years. He was the true treasure they had taken. The irony was crushing. The Sterling Museum, with its millions in jewels and artifacts, had been breached. Not for its priceless treasures, but for a man. An elderly man who was almost as much of an institution as the museum itself. The alarm continued to wail, a fitting soundtrack to the bizarre, impossible puzzle that had just landed on our laps. My mind raced, grappling with the sheer audacity, the strange motive. This wasn't a robbery. This was something far, far stranger, and Elias Henderson's life, or what was left of it, depended on us figuring out why. The disappearance of Elias Henderson, the kindest, most unassuming man in the Sterling Museum, hit harder than any missing diamond ever could have. This wasn't a calculated theft of property. It was a targeted abduction of a human being. And the note, so smug, so deliberate, screamed of a motive far more complex than simple profit. The true treasure. It gnawed at me. What could make an elderly security guard more valuable than centuries of priceless art? Sergeant Miller immediately pulled every resource. Forensics swarmed the European Antiquities Wing, meticulously dusting for prints, analyzing every fiber. But the room was pristine, almost sterile. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, not even a misplaced dust particle near Henderson's empty chair. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist. The security console he'd been monitoring was equally baffling. The system logs showed no anomalies, no unauthorized access codes, no network breaches. Yet the entire museum's internal camera feed had gone to static precisely at the moment the alarm triggered. A ghost in the machine. A highly intelligent ghost. "This guy's a professional, Carter," Miller muttered, running a hand over his tired face. "Not just a burglar, a shadow. How do you get past this kind of security without leaving a trace and take a man without a fight?" That was the question. I replayed the initial moments in my mind. The slightly ajar main doors. The perfect quiet inside. The complete lack of disarray. It wasn't a violent breach. It was an invitation. Or perhaps Henderson himself had opened the door. But why? Elias. Henderson was a man of unwavering routine. A creature of habit. 40 years, same shifts, same coffee cup. The thought of him willingly aiding an abductor was ludicrous. Yet there was no other explanation for the seamless entry. As forensics continued their painstaking work, I began interviewing other museum staff, starting with the night shift supervisor, a nervous man named Mr. Davies. Davies confirmed Henderson's impeccable record. Elias. Never late, never missed a check-in. He knew this place better than the curator. Knew every creak, every echo. He was the most reliable man I knew. Davies was shaken, clearly fond of Henderson. He also confirmed the museum's security system was cutting edge, supposedly impenetrable. It's all encrypted, isolated from the outside network. How could they blind it like that? The more I looked, the more the pieces didn't fit. No witness, no prints, no digital footprint. It was a perfect crime, except for the glaring fact that a man was missing. My focus kept returning to Henderson himself. What was it about him? Was he involved in something outside the museum? A secret life? A hidden past? We started digging into Elias Henderson's background. His file was thin. A few relatives in distant states, a quiet life, no significant financial assets, no known enemies. He was a widower, lived alone in a small apartment downtown, spent his off hours volunteering at a local soup kitchen, and his passion was old coins. He was, by all accounts, a simple, good man, a target too ordinary for such an extraordinary crime. That's when a junior officer, fresh out of the academy, walked up, looking hesitant. "Officer Carter, Sergeant. I found something. It's probably nothing, but..." He held out a small, clear plastic bag. Inside was a single silver button. Not a clothing button, but a decorative button, intricate, with a strange, almost ancient symbol etched into its surface. I found it tucked under the leg of Henderson's chair. It looks really old, maybe from a costume or something from an exhibit. My eyes narrowed. The symbol on the button wasn't from any exhibit in the European Antiquities wing. It looked vaguely familiar, almost like a piece of an old puzzle I couldn't quite place. Miller took the bag. "Good eye, kid. Send it to forensics, see if they can trace it, and run it against any known symbols, cults, anything weird." The kid nodded, looking relieved. The button was a tangible lead, the first real piece of physical evidence that suggested a struggle, or at least a presence beyond the ghost-like entry. It was small, unassuming, but it felt significant. This wasn't a perfect crime anymore. The shadow had left a whisper, and suddenly, the motive, the true treasure, felt less about Elias Henderson's personal value and more about what he represented. The perfect heist, for the least valuable thing, now had its first unsettling clue. And the more I looked at that strange symbol, the more I felt a cold dread creep into my gut. A premonition that this wasn't just about a missing guard. This was about something much, much older. Something that might have been hidden in plain sight, just like the sterling itself. The silver button with its archaic symbol became our immediate focus. Forensics ran it through every database imaginable. Historical artifacts, cult symbols, clandestine organizations, even obscure ancient texts. Days turned into nights, the lead growing colder, the sense of urgency mounting. Elias Henderson was still gone, swallowed by the impossible precision of his abductors. His apartment yielded nothing. A meticulous, sparse living space that reflected his quiet life. No hiddens, compartments, no secret messages, no strange acquaintances. It was a dead end. Then the report came back. The symbol on the button wasn't unique. It was a variation, a stylized, slightly altered version of a sigil found in a very specific, very rare collection. The Grimoire of Ethelred, a set of medieval manuscripts focusing on ancient alchemy and forgotten esoteric societies. What was a symbol from a centuries-old obscure text doing in the Sterling Museum, tucked under Elias Henderson's chair? And how did a modern-day abductor connect to something so ancient? The museum's curator, Dr. Eleanor Vance, a formidable woman, with a sharp mind and an encyclopedic knowledge of artifacts, was our next stop. She was horrified by Henderson's disappearance. When we showed her the button and explained its connection to the grimoire, her face went pale. "The Grimoire of Ethelred," she whispered, her voice barely audible. That's a legendary text. We have fragments here at the Sterling in our restricted archives. Not for public display. Too fragile, too controversial." She led us to the archives, a climate-controlled vault deep within the museum. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and history. Inside, she pointed to a specific, heavily reinforced case. "These are the Sterling fragments. We only have about 20 pages. The complete grimoire is rumored to contain knowledge of, well, things beyond our understanding. Old magic, old power. It's mostly dismissed as legend, but some fringe historians, and unfortunately, some very dangerous collectors, believe it's real." Dr. Vance explained that the symbol on our button matched one of the protective wards, or perhaps an invocation sigil, found in a particular section of the fragments. It's meant to protect or perhaps to summon something powerful. This is not for a jewelry heist, officer. This is for something far darker. She also mentioned a small underground community of scholars and collectors who were obsessed with ancient texts, often blurring the line between academic interest and dangerous fanaticism. They believed in the literal power of these symbols. My mind raced. So, someone broke into the Sterling not for the art, but for Elias Henderson because of his connection to these fragments? But what connection? Dr. Vance hesitated, then spoke. Elias was an enthusiast. He had a deep, almost encyclopedic knowledge of old texts. He often spent his lunch breaks in the archives, reading the digitized versions of the grimoire fragments. He was fascinated by them. He believed there was more to them than just historical curiosity. Her words hit me like a cold wave. Henderson wasn't just a guard. He was a scholar in his own right, perhaps known in certain circles for his unique interest in the grimoire. This wasn't a random target. This was targeted for his knowledge. This explained the impossible entry. If Henderson himself, under duress or deception, had opened the door, it would bypass all the electronic security. The phantom burglar wasn't just a master of security. They were a master of manipulation. But what knowledge could Elias Henderson possess that was worth risking a museum heist and kidnapping? What ancient power, what forgotten secret was contained in those texts that someone would go to such extreme lengths to extract from an old man? The case had just shifted from a bizarre abduction to something far more sinister, touching upon ancient mysteries and dangerous obsessions. The ghost in the machine wasn't digital. It was something far older, a shadow from centuries past reaching into the present. And Elias Henderson was the key, the living library of knowledge that the abductors desperately wanted to unlock. We had a symbol, a book, and a missing man. The puzzle was becoming clearer, but its true implications were terrifying. With Dr. Vance's revelations, the case roared to life. Elias Henderson wasn't just a guard. He was a living index to forgotten knowledge, a man whose quiet obsession with arcane texts had painted a target on his back. The abductors didn't need the physical grimoire. They needed what was in Elias Henderson's mind. They needed his memory. We immediately expanded our search to include anyone who had accessed the digital grimoire fragments at the museum in recent years, anyone who had corresponded with Elias Henderson about his research, or anyone known to be part of the fringe esoteric communities Dr. Vance had mentioned. This was a deep dive into a world of obsession, where ancient symbols held modern, dangerous power. Our break came from an unexpected source, an old forum dedicated to obscure medieval texts. An account under the username Ethelred's Seeker had been in frequent, almost feverish contact with an account linked to Elias Henderson's personal email. The Seeker was asking increasingly specific questions about certain symbols, about the precise rituals associated with them, and about how to activate dormant powers mentioned in the grimoire. The conversations became darker, more demanding, almost threatening in their intensity. Henderson in his replies was cautious, a scholar warning a fanatic. He dismissed their claims of activation as dangerous delusion, reiterating that these were historical texts, not instruction manuals. We cross-referenced Ethelred's Seeker. The IP addresses traced back to a series of burner phones and untraceable networks, all leading to a dead end. But the obsession, the language, the specific focus on activation, it screamed. Then a new development, a series of small, seemingly unrelated break-ins at private collections across the city, all within the last 6 months. They weren't high-value thefts. Each time, only a single, specific, seemingly innocuous item was taken: an antique compass, a bronze figurine of a horned creature, a small, polished obsidian shard. Forensics had dismissed them as random acts, too insignificant to connect. But now, with the grimoire as our lens, we revisited them. Each stolen item was subtly linked to a symbol or an object described in the very fragments Elias Henderson had been studying. The abductors weren't just taking items. They were collecting components, ingredients for a ritual that Henderson, in his academic curiosity, had inadvertently pieced together from the grimoire. The pieces slammed together with a sickening certainty. The abductors weren't stealing to sell. They were stealing to perform, and they needed Elias Henderson to complete their deadly puzzle. He was the only one who could provide the final missing information, the precise sequence, the exact incantation, the activation key. The true treasure was the power they believed the grimoire held, and Elias was their living conduit to it. My mind reeled at the sheer audacity, the terrifying blend of meticulous planning and delusional fanaticism. This wasn't a criminal enterprise. It was a cult, a small, dangerous group, obsessed with ancient power, willing to commit kidnapping and multiple burglaries to achieve their twisted goal. We identified potential locations where such a ritual might take place, abandoned industrial sites, old secluded mansions outside the city, places where the strange energies they sought might be unleashed. We started a methodical search, cross-referencing known cult activity with property records, using the patterns of the previous minor burglaries to narrow down their likely base of operations. The clock was ticking. Every moment that passed meant Elias Henderson was closer to being exploited, perhaps even sacrificed for a belief system that belonged in the darkest corners of history. As we honed in on a secluded, heavily fortified compound once owned by an eccentric industrialist known for his fascination with the occult, I knew this wasn't just about rescuing a guard. This was about stopping a ritual, stopping a delusion that could have catastrophic consequences, not just for Elias Henderson, but for anyone caught in the path of truly deranged fanaticism. The silence of the Sterling Museum had been the first clue. Now we were about to confront the terrifying scream of a desperate, dangerous obsession. The compound was exactly as I'd imagined, a sprawling, dilapidated estate, nestled deep within a dense, isolated forest, miles from the nearest road. High walls, barbed wire, and overgrown trees hid it from casual view. This was where the Ethelred's seekers had chosen to enact their dark ritual, and Elias Henderson was their unwilling centerpiece. Sergeant Miller assembled a tactical team, our faces grim, our movements precise. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloying and unnatural. A hint of wood smoke and a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. The silence here was different from the museum. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that precedes a storm. We breached the perimeter in the pre-dawn hours, moving like shadows through the overgrown grounds. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig felt amplified in the oppressive quiet. We found the main building, a decaying mansion, its windows boarded up, casting ominous shadows. A faint, flickering light emanated from what looked like the old ballroom, and the sound. A low, rhythmic chanting rising and falling, a monotone hum that vibrated through the ground. It was unsettling, primal, a sound utterly out of place in our modern world. This was it. We moved in fast, breaching the ballroom doors with a single, synchronized thrust. The scene inside was a chilling tableau. The room was transformed, crudely decorated with symbols drawn in chalk on the dusty floor, flickering candles, casting dancing shadows, and strange, archaic instruments laid out on a makeshift altar. In the center, tied to a large wooden chair, was Elias Henderson. He was pale, disoriented, but alive. Around him, a dozen figures, robed in dark, hooded cloaks, swayed and chanted, their voices rising in intensity. And leading them, standing over Henderson, was the Ethelred Seeker himself. He was a man in his late 30s, gaunt with wild, feverish eyes that held the chilling glint of absolute conviction. In his hand, he held the antique compass we'd linked to one of the earlier break-ins. As our team burst in, the chanting faltered. The Seeker's head snapped towards us, his eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and desperation. He hadn't expected us. "Police, drop your weapons, hands where I can see them!" Miller's voice boomed, cutting through the eerie chanting. Most of the cloaked figures hesitated, their delusional fervor momentarily broken by the stark reality of armed officers. But the Seeker did not. He raised the compass high, muttering an incantation, his eyes fixed on Henderson. "No, you don't understand. The convergence. He knows the final key." The Seeker shrieked, his voice raw with fanaticism. He wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was trying to force something from Henderson. He was trying to activate the supposed power, believing Henderson's knowledge was literally the final piece of his ritual. I moved instantly, breaking formation, heading straight for Henderson. The Seeker saw me, his eyes flaring. He dropped the compass and lunged, not at me, but back towards a small, concealed satchel near the altar. I intercepted him, tackling him to the ground. He fought with a desperate, almost inhuman strength, fueled by his fanaticism, clawing and struggling to reach the satchel. Miller and other officers moved in, subduing the other cult members, cuffing them one by one. I wrestled the Seeker into submission, finally pinning him. His eyes, even under the weight of my knee, burned with an unholy light. It's too late. The convergence, the power, it will be unleashed, he rasped, conviction unwavering. We quickly freed Elias Henderson. He was weak, disoriented, but otherwise unharmed. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, weary gratitude. Officer, they wanted the sequence, the true summoning, he whispered, confirming our fears. They hadn't wanted to kill him. They wanted to use him. Later at the station, the seeker, identified as a brilliant but deeply disturbed former history professor named Alistair Finch, continued to rant about cosmic convergences and ancient powers. He had assembled his cult, systematically collected the components from the burglaries, and kidnapped Henderson, believing the old man's unique scholarly grasp of the grimoire was the final, living ingredient needed to unlock unimaginable power. He genuinely believed that if he completed the ritual, he could reshape reality. The items they had stolen were just mundane artifacts, but in Finch's deluded mind, they were conduits of ancient energy. Elias Henderson, once recovered, provided his full statement, detailing his horrifying ordeal, his refusal to give Finch the key, and his terror at being part of such a monstrous delusion. He was a survivor, a quiet scholar who had inadvertently stumbled into the crosshairs of madness. The case of the Sterling Museum heist was closed, not with stolen jewels, but with a rescued scholar and a cult of fanatics arrested. It was a bizarre, chilling reminder that the most dangerous treasures aren't always gold or diamonds, but ideas. And sometimes, the most priceless thing you can guard is the truth, buried deep within the mind of an unassuming man. I walked away from that case with a profound understanding that some shadows are not cast by buildings, but by the obsessions of the human mind, waiting to be unleashed. And, sometimes in the quiet corners of our world, ancient whispers can still drive men to madness.